Hi, Stuart here. One more trip down the Redis lane. This time we're going to talk about using Redis for ASP.NET, specifically ASP.NET Core 3.1. And this is a follow-on to our earlier talk about Redis just as a general purpose tool. And again, you can get all the good stuff on redis.io. So what's it good for? Well, caching. It's a tremendously effective replacement for an in-memory cache. It's blazingly fast. It allows you to have all of your web instances keep the same state. You can do lots of very cool tricks, like you can write a little loader that preloads a bunch of cached information. You know, postal codes, country codes, all that ephemera. 100 most common SKUs on the website, whatever you need to cache. And you can preload it from the outside. And likewise, it's fairly easy to invalidate the cache for all the instances and potentially replace it with new data. So in many ways, it's quite splendid. And the caching pattern, particularly for the web, is excellent because you can do something called faulting through, which is I go ask for something that's not I look in the cache first, it's not in the cache, I go get it from its authoritative source, and I put it in the cache for next time, right? Faulting through. So you can think about the preloading thing. So the first time I go, and I'm looking for state codes, right? Bang, there it is, super, super fast. So we have a really easy demo just to show you how easy it is to get Redis going. Again, I'm going to run it on my laptop. I'm going to run my Redis in Docker. But if you're up in the cloud, you definitely want to use the PaaS instance of Redis.
Okay, as always, we need to start Docker. Okay, Docker started. Into Visual Studio we go. So we're going to go ahead, now that our Docker is started, and start our Redis container in Docker. And Docker is started and running. We're going to go ahead and make sure that our startup project is the web project, because that's the bit we want to demo. And we'll compile and run it. And you can see, for the purposes of this demo, I've just done a real simple web API. Again, this is .NET Core 3.1 LTS. And I have two methods, stash and fetch. So we'll call fetch. We'll click on try it out, and we'll ask for X. And in fact, we're going to throw a key not found message, which is perfectly fine for the purposes of this. And of course, the output will be a nice splendiferous status code. So let's go back to post and give X a value. So we're going to say X is equal to 3. And we'll hit execute, and you can see our API responds as 201 created, because we created a new key. And now that we have done that, we can scroll down and try to go get X again. And lo and behold, we get 3 back. So that's pretty much what this thing is meant to do. Of course, you could have way more complicated scenarios than that, but I just wanted something that was really easy and accessible. So let's go look at how much code we had to write to make that happen. So let's start with startup. You can see that we have our dependency injection, our hosting, our logging, our builders, all that good stuff. We are going to set all of the usual suspects. And in one very simple line of code, we add Stack Exchange Redis cache. Its configuration is localhost. And as you recall from last time, we've mapped the Redis port running in Docker to the same port running on my local host. So in fact, this works splendidly. You can add multiple instances of the Redis cache with different instance names. In this case, I'm just staying with sample instance. It could really be anything if I only wanted the one instance. And this is going to add it to my service stack. Notice I am using the proper discarding here, because in fact, this method returns an iService collection object, which I could do things with. But It's a good practice that if you have a function that returns a value, that you do something with the value, or you tell the compiler you're not planning to do anything with the value, and that's what a discard does. All right, that's all there is to it to make Redis cache injectable into my controllers and other code. So let's go pull up our values controller and go up to the constructor, and you can see that we inject an I-distributed cache. So the great thing about the ASP.NET caching mechanism is that all of the compatible cache providers implement this interface, I-distributed cache. And the great thing about that is I can swap out my Redis cache for any other cache I want, but the rest of my code will stay the same. I just need to change my startup. And in fact, I could have a case statement in my startup and have all kinds of different cache alternatives. So I-distributed cache is in fact the magic interface that our caches all need to implement. And if we go and take a look at it, you can see that we have some simple gets and sets, and there are some extension methods too that aren't shown here. And so let's go and take a look at first our stash method. So in our stash method, we have the typical setup. We're doing our parameter validation, which is always a fine thing. We're doing some logging. And all we really need to do is literally say set string name value. And of course, we are returning the created because we just added a new one. And fetching the values is even simpler. All we need to do is say value equals cache get string. And again, I'm using the this scoping modifier because that's a good best practice. And that is literally as complicated as that has to be. But of course, you're not just stuck with strings. You could, like in the previous example, make your own wrappers or helpers, and you could cache or get any value type that you want as long as it's serializable.